kids can be there and they can learn all the knowledge in the world, but unless they see the relevance of it, the use of it, they're just there because they have to be there. And we don't want that for our youth. We don't want it in our schools, and we don't want it in our church. And so I spent a lot of time thinking on it this week. I actually didn't realize that I was slated to do the sermon until fairly late in the week. But I'm glad I did, because I didn't like where we left that conversation last week. To start out in this, I want to kind of talk about my experience in the church growing up. And what it was like for me to grow up in the church. And, what I have seen in my experience and the experience of a lot of my peers. And I have to do this a little bit, gently, because I'm talking about my parents in some of this, right? And the experience I had growing up was very much shaped by my parents. And, they're flawed people who have changed incredibly in my lifetime. And, so I don't want this to be too much of a criticism of them, because I think we all mess up our children in kind of our own unique way. And it's a tremendous responsibility that, all of us fail on to some degree. It's not easy to know what to do with your kids. And there's times later in your life where you kind of go back and go, I messed up. Probably should even apologize, right? And my experience as a kid in the church was one of, I would say, criticism and rules. It was an era of kids should be seen but not heard. Conformity was the rule of society at the time, and it was enforced through corporal punishment. I mean, it was thought of as a good practice to give regular beatings to your children. And, that's probably wasn't the best approach. Maybe we've gone a little bit too far the other way, where we just love and love and love, and our kids get no discipline or no guidance. So I could see that in my life. Maybe I've gone a little bit too far the other direction at times. Our kids do need some guidance and discipline, but when I was a child, it was very common. It was a very conformist culture at the time, and the church was no exception. And most of my peer group is no longer in the church. So we were forced to go to church, and we were forced to behave in a certain quiet way. You couldn't be active, couldn't make noise in church. You had to come dressed a certain way. Jewelry on young women, of course, was frowned upon, commented upon. And I think probably a number of young people were driven out of the church because of their appearance and the way people treated them for it. And it's so, I think as parents, as church members, in some way, we're a model for God. And God to me at that age was just a very judgmental, hard taskmaster. And, so Adriana's comment last week kind of got my brain spinning on my experience, starting to understand in mid-20s, 30s even, that, the love of God. And he's not there to jump at the chance to render judgment on you and damn you for your sins. And we're all sinners, right? So there's no success in that kind of environment. And so then, you come down to the question last week we were exploring in lesson study. What are the causes of kids leaving the church now? What can we do about it? And I didn't like some of the answers that came out. We had some opinions that were very kind of along the lines of parents need to make their kids do the standards and show up every day, week, and participate whether they want to or not. We had some of those opinions. We had, trying to remember some of the others, but it kind of got me to thinking a lot about my own failings in this congregation in terms of our kids and the relationship the congregation has to children and our responsibility, and then our responsibility as a parent. So children in the church, I want to explore a little bit some of the issues we can maybe pinpoint and address. Those of you that know me know that I like application. I love to-do lists, always have. It's nice to have a list of things you can be conscious about doing better at. And I have definitely come up with some this week, but I want to turn to Matthew 18, 1 to 10, and read it for you to start. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, "I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of God. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. Such things must come, but woe to the man through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. See that you do not look down on one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven." Pretty powerful, isn't it? Children in the church, and we should welcome them and do whatever we can to keep them from stumbling and falling. And I think as a congregation or as parents, we have to kind of look at and evaluate what ways do we make the young among us stumble. So I want your interaction on this. What ways do we cause problems?
Focusing on the appearance, like you said.
Okay. Thank you, Nikki. Focusing on appearance. Anybody else? Mike?
I would dare say being unconverted yourself, putting up an appearance but not actually being converted.
Susan?
Well, mine was sort of like Mike's. We have to be a good example. You know, they can become attached to us, but if we're not giving them a good example, we're leading them the wrong way.
Okay, good example.
Gossiping or talking about others when you're not at church and like at home during the week, they're not the way they are when they go to church.
Okay.
And the kids see that.
Gossiping. Yeah. Very good. I might have spelled that wrong, but. Adriana?
Judging other people.
Judging other people. Nikki?
Focusing so much on the rules that it kind of kills the love of God. Like, you know, I know family who's made, like, oh, you focus so much, but you can't do this huge list of things on the Sabbath, so that the kids were just slavering at the mouth for the Sabbath to be over, because it meant it was no fun.
Rules over love. I remember a family from my youth that was very, very much that way. They literally could not basically do anything the entire day. So it was, eat whatever cold food was prepared the day before and sit quietly. You couldn't go for a bike ride. I mean, they could not do anything. And it was, I don't think, I would doubt one of them is in the church, actually, because the Sabbath had become a burden. Anybody else before we dive in on these a little?
How we misrepresent God's love for people.
Okay. Misrepresent God's love. And I think as parents, we know that we know our shortcomings, right? It's, as a parent, you feel a lot of responsibility, and you know that you're not perfect. And we don't always represent God's love. I know I've had to apologize to my kids at times, where it's unnecessarily harsh, or just did something that was maybe for their own good, but not in a loving manner.
I guess pride would be one of those things, where a parent doesn't feel like they can apologize to a child, like, but I think we should.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't quite catch that, but.
The way we treat their parents.
Okay. So the way that, like, the church treats a child's parent, okay, like that.
Or the way the parents treat each other in the home.
Okay. So the way the parents treat each other. So we have a lot of reasons or struggles, maybe I should put it as struggles, that our kids may leave the church. And so then you kind of come down to, how do we not be that way with our children? How do we encourage our kids to stay in the church? I spoke with a friend this week that talked about relevance. The kids don't see that there's relevance. And part of that is, I think, is that we don't always show the relevance in our own life. And sometimes because that pride thing you mentioned, we don't want to admit our struggles to our kids, do we? I think it's important for kids in this church to know that we aren't perfect people, that we've had struggles, we have struggles with sin, we have struggles with how we treat each other, and this is how God has helped me in this, right? They need to know those things and see the relevance. And it's not real easy to do. I'm thinking about myself this week in regards to this church and the kids I've seen grow to full adulthood. Some of these kids are now having kids. And I have largely been a person who ignores the kids for, I've been detached as a person in that regard. I don't know that any of the kids that have grown up here ever heard me express that I actually cared about their well-being. And that's a failing on my part, is it not? I like kids. I do. But, I have never really been involved in a constructive and meaningful and loving manner with the kids of this church. And even in my home, I have to be very conscious of not doing the same thing. I love my kids, right? But it's pretty easy for me to get busy, get detached, go 2-3 days and not have any kind of meaningful conversation about what's going on in their life and how they're doing as people. And, I would suspect that some of you also have struggled with the same thing. Our kids matter, and I don't think we're always very good at letting them know they matter. Your kids don't need you. They don't need to see you just when they've done wrong. That's not our role to be there just when they need correction. And that's the era I grew up in a large degree was that way. Adults were around, but, their interaction with you was largely just, hey, you screwed up. Here's your correction, whatever it may be. And, I think for me as an adult, it's been a bit of a struggle to meaningfully interact with the kids in my life. And this topic has been on my mind some, not just from the church perspective, but I have nieces and nephews that I basically have no contact with. Some of whom really do need some mentoring and need some adults in their life that just care for them. And I haven't been good as a person in doing that. And I want to be more conscious about it. One thing that I don't necessarily see up here is judging other people. I want to explore that one a little bit because I know people in my peer group that were actively damaged by members of the church, abused, mistreated, and it wasn't dealt with. So I want to explore that one a little bit because this judging other people is not something we should be engaging in, right? Shouldn't be at potluck talking about so-and-so and their struggle. Nikki?
It depends on the kind of judging, when we're just being opinionated, that's one thing, but
Yeah. We don't want to be in a position where we're looking down on other people. And there, I did pull up a couple verses on that I do want to go to, because I think it's important in safeguarding our children that there is an appropriate judging in the church. And I want to look at that. Let's see here. 1 Corinthians 5, 1 to 2, and then verse 13. So 1 Corinthians 5, 1 to 2, and then 13 in the same chapter. It is actually reported that there is a sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that does not occur even among the pagans. A man has his father's wife, and you are proud. Shouldn't you rather have been filled with grief and have put out of your fellowship the man who did this? So this is Paul speaking to a church. Here's a member, maybe prominent, we don't know, involved in a very public, shameful thing, and you are proud. Now we all know sin kills, right? It's all dirty. It's all black. You know, one sin over here isn't any more of a death sentence than stealing a candy bar. Right? They're all sin. But there is sin that has victims. And there is sin in churches that needs dealt with at times. And you have to do it to protect the victim. You have to do it to protect the young people, the other members. And there's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes I think we're a little too nice. And we don't deal with stuff, and it's natural. I mean, none of us like conflict, right? Now, I at one point asked someone to never attend here again, and I'm glad I did. Wasn't an easy thing to do, but it was important for the integrity of the church. When there's people in attendance, you know, that are damaged by their being there. And I'm going to go ahead and read verse 13. 12 and 13. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked man from among you. So I think that really gets down to the heart of the judgment thing. We aren't to judge people outside this church, the struggles with sin they're having. If anything, we have the mandate to go to them, don't we? And to show them the love of God. But Paul here is saying, you've got to deal with stuff inside the church. It's a black mark on the church. And, you know, you have a major responsibility to protect the young people of this church. And when a problem becomes apparent, you know, we as a congregation need to deal with it. And I know from my peer group that there's been situations that weren't dealt with. And people that were driven from the church, from the abuses they experienced, from leadership in church, from prominent members. And we never want that. We want to love and protect those that are here to the greatest extent possible. And sometimes that means making a judgment. I had trouble finding it again. In my wanderings through Scripture on this subject, I did run across the verse that talked about going to a brother that's gone astray and gently remonstrating with them, bringing them back into the fold with love. And there is a place for that. But sometimes it might be better for that person, if they hurt somebody in your congregation, to go to another congregation. Doesn't mean you can't sit down with them, in a loving manner, bring them back into the fold with God, but it doesn't necessarily mean they need to come back to your congregation. We all hope that anybody gets right with God before they pass and can be in the kingdom. But sometimes the consequences here on earth are a disfellowship.
Be nice to be there fully.
Yeah. Probably off, well, I was going to say I'm probably off track a little bit, but that's okay. Now let's talk about some of the positives, or positive ways we can impact youth. I had some more verses here, but we're about out of time, and I don't want to end necessarily with some of the struggles we have. How do we show God's love to our kids in the church? How do we do that?
Listening,
Okay. Nikki, listening?
truly listening, not just, okay, yeah, but really listening.
Anybody else?
Showing mercy.
Okay. Showing mercy. Susan?
I was listening to a podcast this week and it talked about just your facial expression, that you're glad to see somebody affects their brain. So we can positively affect other people's brains by being glad to see them and showing it.
I like that. I listened to a podcast this week too on charisma. It was really kind of fascinating and how to, in the first few seconds of seeing somebody, to basically give that message that, you matter to me. I like you. I don't know how we phrase that in a sentence there, but
Glad to see them.
yeah.
Being available if something's going on and they're so busy trying to figure out which way to go, that you're there and that they can come.
Okay. Being available. Truly available. You ever been around somebody where you need some help, you need some guidance, and you go to them and it feels like you're really inconveniencing them? Doesn't feel good, does it? We don't want to be that way with our youth or each other. Anything else? Now, this idea that we exhibit the love of God, we fail on that. We really do. We're at the root, all humanity is a bit selfish. And so we fail on that, but I think